But when the rescuers discovered the horrifying truth, Dusty, they called her, though her fur, once a rich golden brown, was now more the color of faded sand. She knew her name, or at least, she knew the sound of it, the way it rumbled in his chest when he wasn't too busy with other things. He didn't use it much anymore. Mostly it was just a kick, or a shove, or the sharp sting of a rolled-up newspaper against her flank. But sometimes, when the sun was just right, and the air held the promise of rain, he'd scratch behind her ears, a fleeting, almost forgotten tenderness. Those were the moments Dusty lived for. Her world was small, confined to the dusty patch of yard behind the dilapidated trailer. The trailer belonged to him, and by extension, it belonged to her. She'd arrived as a puppy, a wriggling ball of fur presented as a fleeting amusement. He'd been different then, or so she remembered. There were games of fetch, clumsy and joyful, in the first few weeks. There were scraps of food slipped under the table, a shared moment of connection. But time, like the relentless Texas sun, had bleached those memories, leaving behind a harsh reality. Now, food was scarce, water even more so. She foraged for scraps, chased the occasional rabbit that dared to venture too close, and dreamed of the days when a bowl, heavy with kibble, appeared as if by magic. Those dreams were as faded as her fur. Her favorite spot, the one constant in her ever-shrinking world, was a patch of sun that slanted through the gaps in the overgrown fence. It warmed her bones, eased the constant ache in her hips, and allowed her to drift into a hazy half-sleep. In those moments, she wasn't just Dusty, the neglected dog. She was a creature of warmth and light, a golden shadow basking in the sun's embrace. She would lie there for hours, her head resting on her worn paws, her eyes half closed, absorbing the warmth and dreaming of a different life. A life where a gentle hand stroked her fur and a kind voice spoke her name with affection. She waited patiently for that life to return, for the man who had brought her here, however changed he might be, to come back to her. She waited, even as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, and the first stars began to twinkle. She waited because waiting was all she knew how to do. The day he left, the air crackled with a different kind of tension. It wasn't the usual simmering anger that hung around him like a cloud. This was different. He moved with a strange urgency, throwing things into bags, his face tight and unfamiliar. Dusty watched from her patch of sun, her tail giving a tentative thump against the dry earth. She didn't understand the change, but her instincts, honed by years of living on the edge of survival, screamed that something was wrong. He didn't look at her, not even once, as he hauled the bags into the rusty pickup truck. He slammed the door, the sound echoing through the quiet afternoon, and then he did something he'd never done before. He opened the gate. Dusty had never ventured beyond the confines of the yard. The world outside was a mystery, a place of strange noises and unfamiliar smells. But as the truck rumbled to life, a primal fear gripped her. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that he wasn't coming back. She watched the truck disappear down the dusty road, a plume of brown dust marking its hasty retreat. Then silence, a silence so profound it pressed against her ears, amplifying the frantic beating of her heart. She stayed by the gate, her tail tucked between her legs, her eyes fixed on the empty road. She waited. Days blurred into nights. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the nights brought a chilling dampness. Dusty huddled in her patch of sun during the day, and under the skeletal remains of a bush at night, seeking shelter from the elements. Food became even scarcer. Her ribs protruded through her thinning fur, and her once bright eyes grew dull with hunger. She drank from puddles, the murky water barely quenching her thirst. Still, she waited. The neighbors, a young couple named Sarah and Ben, noticed her after a few days. They'd seen him leave, the truck kicking up dust, and then the silence. They'd seen Dusty before, a fleeting glimpse of a golden dog in a desolate yard. Now, they saw her for what she was, abandoned, alone, and slowly fading away. Sarah, her heart aching for the neglected creature, started leaving food and water outside the gate. Dusty, wary at first, approached cautiously, her tail wagging hesitantly. The smell of the kibble, the cool, clean water was a siren call she couldn't resist. She lapped at the water, wolfed down the food, her body trembling with relief. Sarah and Ben spoke to her softly, their voices gentle, their hands outstretched. Dusty flinched at first, remembering the sting of the rolled-up newspaper. But their touch was different, hesitant, kind. Slowly, tentatively, she began to trust them. She allowed them to stroke her fur, a tentative, almost forgotten pleasure. But even as she accepted their kindness, her eyes remained fixed on the road, waiting for the familiar rumble of the truck, waiting for him to return. Her loyalty, a twisted and misplaced thing, remained unbroken. Sarah and Ben continued to care for Dusty, their concern growing with each passing day. She was so thin, her ribs visible beneath her matted fur, her movements slow and labored. The wound on her leg, a ragged tear that had likely been there for some time, festered, attracting flies. They cleaned it gently, applying antiseptic ointment, their touch feather-light. Dusty flinched at first, but the relief from the stinging antiseptic seemed to outweigh her fear. They tried to coax her inside, offering her a soft blanket and a warm, safe space. But Dusty refused, her paws rooted to her patch of sun, her gaze perpetually fixed on the empty road. It was as if she was tethered to that spot, bound by an invisible chain of loyalty and misplaced hope. Sarah and Ben knew they couldn't leave her there. Her condition was deteriorating rapidly, and she needed professional help. They contacted the local animal shelter, explaining Dusty's situation, the abandonment, the festering wound, the sheer fragility of her existence. The shelter, overwhelmed with cases, promised to send someone as soon as they could. Days stretched into an agonizing eternity. Sarah and Ben continued their vigil, feeding Dusty, tending to her wound, whispering words of comfort. They saw the flicker of gratitude in her dull eyes, the tentative wag of her tail, but they also saw the unwavering hope, the constant expectation in her gaze, always searching the horizon for the return of her abuser. They learned, through hushed conversations with other neighbors, bits and pieces of Dusty's story. He'd found her as a puppy, a stray he'd picked up on a whim. He'd been different then, some said, more jovial, less prone to the dark moods that seemed to consume him in recent years. They spoke of his temper, his unpredictable rages, his neglect of the poor creature. They spoke in whispers, fear still lingering in the air, even after he was gone. Finally, the day arrived when a battered van, emblazoned with the logo of the Hearts of Gold Animal Rescue, pulled up outside the gate. Two women, their faces etched with compassion, emerged, carrying a crate and a blanket. They approached Dusty cautiously, speaking in soft, soothing voices. Dusty, sensing a change, a shift in the routine, remained rooted to her spot, her eyes darting between the newcomers and the empty road. Sarah and Ben explained the situation, their voices thick with emotion. The rescuers nodded, their expressions grim. They knew this story, a story repeated too often, a story of neglect, abandonment, and broken trust. They approached Dusty slowly, offering her a piece of cooked chicken, the aroma wafting through the air, tempting her with its savory scent. Dusty hesitated, her hunger battling with her ingrained wariness. The chicken won. She took the offering, her tail giving a tentative wag. As they gently coaxed her into the crate, Dusty cast one last look at the empty road, a look filled with a mixture of hope, confusion, and a deep, ingrained sadness. It was a look that would haunt Sarah and Ben for a long time to come. The crate rattled in the back of the van, a constant, jarring vibration that echoed Dusty's own internal tremors. She huddled in the corner, the blanket offering little comfort. The scent of the chicken still lingered, a phantom taste on her tongue, a reminder of the kindness she had briefly experienced. But the fear remained, a deep-seated anxiety that had become a part of her very being. The two rescuers, Carol and Lisa, kept glancing back at her through the rearview mirror. They saw the fear in her eyes, the way she flinched at every bump in the road, the way she seemed to shrink in on herself, as if trying to disappear. They spoke to her softly, their voices a gentle murmur against the noise of the engine. They told her she was safe now, that she was going to a place where she would be cared for, where she would be loved. Dusty didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone, the quiet reassurance that resonated deep within her. The journey was long, over 100 miles, a seemingly endless stretch of highway that snaked through the vast Texas landscape. Dusty had never been in a car before, and the constant motion, the changing scenery, the unfamiliar sounds, disoriented her. She pressed her body against the cold metal of the crate, her heart pounding in her chest. As they drove, Carol and Lisa talked about Dusty, about her condition, about the cruelty she had endured. They spoke of the countless animals they had rescued, the endless cycle of neglect and abuse they witnessed. Their voices were weary, tinged with sadness, but also with a fierce determination. They were the voices of the voiceless, the protectors of the vulnerable, the last line of defense against the indifference of the world. They stopped once, at a small gas station, to give Dusty some water and a small amount of food. She drank thirstily, lapping at the water as if it were the most precious thing in the world. She ate the food slowly, cautiously, as if afraid it would be taken away from her. Carol knelt beside her, stroking her fur gently. Dusty flinched at first, then leaned into the touch, a small, almost imperceptible sign of trust. As they continued their journey, the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a mirror of the colors that had once graced Dusty's fur. The darkness deepened, and the lights of the city began to appear on the horizon. Dusty watched them, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. She had never seen so many lights before, so much activity, so much life. Finally, they arrived at their destination, a small, brightly lit building with a sign that read Hearts of Gold Animal Rescue. Carol and Lisa carefully lifted the crate from the van and carried it inside. The sounds of barking dogs, meowing cats, and the cheerful voices of people filled the air. Dusty had never heard so many animals before, so much noise, so much life. She trembled, her fear rising again, threatening to overwhelm her. But then, she saw the faces of the people who greeted them, their smiles warm, their eyes filled with compassion. She saw the other animals, some in cages, some roaming freely, all of them looking healthy, well-fed, loved. And for the first time since she had been abandoned, a tiny spark of hope flickered within her. Maybe, just maybe, she was finally safe. The bright fluorescent lights of the vet's clinic were a stark contrast to the dim, dusty world Dusty had known. The air hummed with the low thrum of unseen machines and the faint, sterile scent of antiseptic. She was placed on a cold, metal examination table, and a young woman with kind eyes and gentle hands began to examine her. This was Dr. Emily Carter, a veterinarian who had dedicated her life to healing the broken and comforting the lost. Dusty flinched at every touch, her body tense, her tail tucked tightly between her legs. Dr. Carter spoke to her softly, her voice a soothing balm against Dusty's frayed nerves. She ran her hands gently over Dusty's matted fur, noting the protruding ribs, the thinness of her frame, the ragged wound on her leg. Her expression grew grimmer with each discovery. The initial examination revealed the extent of Dusty's neglect. She was severely malnourished, her weight a mere fraction of what it should have been. Her coat was dull and lifeless, infested with fleas and ticks. The wound on her leg was infected, the surrounding skin inflamed and painful to the touch. Dr. Carter cleaned the wound carefully, applying a fresh bandage. She prescribed antibiotics to fight the infection and vitamins to help Dusty regain her strength. But the most disturbing discovery was the condition of Dusty's hind legs. They were worn down, the fur rubbed raw, the skin calloused and cracked. It was clear she had been dragging herself, struggling to move, for a long time. Dr. Carter suspected neurological damage, but she needed more information. She recommended an MRI, a detailed scan of Dusty's spine and brain. But Dusty's condition was so fragile, her body so weak, that Dr. Carter hesitated. The procedure was risky, the anesthesia potentially fatal. She discussed the options with Carol and Lisa, her voice grave. They agreed that the MRI was necessary, that they needed to know the full extent of Dusty's injuries if they were to have any hope of helping her. The MRI revealed the devastating truth. Embedded in Dusty's spine, lodged between two vertebrae, was a bullet. Not a small pellet, but a full-sized round, a cruel reminder of the violence she had endured. The bullet had likely been there for a long time, causing chronic pain, hindering her movement, slowly crippling her. Removing it was a delicate and dangerous procedure, but leaving it in place was a death sentence. The news hit Carol and Lisa hard. They had suspected abuse, but the reality was even worse than they had imagined. They looked at Dusty, curled up on a soft blanket in a corner of the clinic, her eyes dull with pain and exhaustion. They saw not just a neglected dog, but a victim of unimaginable cruelty, a survivor who had endured more than any creature should have to bear. Dr. Carter explained the risks of surgery, the slim chance of success. She told them that Dusty might never walk again, that she might not even survive the operation. But they knew they had to try. They owed her that much. They owed her a chance at a life free from pain, a chance at happiness. They looked at each other, their eyes filled with tears, and nodded. They would do everything they could to save Dusty. Dusty lay in a small, sterile room at the clinic, her body weakened by the ordeal, her spirit dimmed by the pain. The world around her was a blur of unfamiliar sounds and smells. The gentle murmur of the nurses, the beeping of machines, the hushed conversations of the staff. All these sounds mingled together, creating a constant, unsettling hum. She longed for the familiar silence of her patch of sun, the quiet solitude of her abandoned yard. But that world was gone now, replaced by this strange, new reality. Dr. Carter and the nurses tended to her, their touch gentle, their voices soothing. They administered pain medication, cleaned her wounds, and offered her small amounts of food and water. Dusty accepted their care cautiously, her trust slowly, tentatively growing. She sensed their compassion, their genuine concern for her well-being. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time, a feeling that warmed her heart, even in the midst of her pain. One day, a nurse named Maria brought her a small, stuffed toy. It was a plush, brightly colored dog, with floppy ears and a smiling face. Dusty eyed it with suspicion at first, unsure what to make of this strange object. She had never had a toy before. Her life had been a constant struggle for survival, a relentless pursuit of food and shelter. Toys were a foreign concept, an extravagance she couldn't comprehend. Maria placed the toy gently beside her, encouraging her to touch it. Dusty hesitated, then sniffed at it cautiously. The toy was soft, its fabric smooth against her rough fur. She nudged it with her nose, then pawed at it gently. It was a strange sensation, this soft, yielding object against her paws. Slowly, tentatively, Dusty began to interact with the toy. She nuzzled it, then carried it gently in her mouth, her tail giving a small, almost imperceptible wag. It was as if the toy had awakened something within her, a dormant playfulness, a forgotten joy. She clutched the toy close to her, finding comfort in its soft, familiar shape. It was a small thing, a simple gesture of kindness, but it meant the world to Dusty. It was a symbol of hope, a sign that maybe, just maybe, things were starting to change. The doctors discussed Dusty's case, weighing the risks of surgery against the certainty of her continued suffering. They knew the odds were stacked against her, but they also knew they couldn't give up. They decided to proceed with the surgery, but only after they had stabilized her condition, strengthened her body, and prepared her for the arduous procedure. They knew it was a long shot, but they had to try. They had to give Dusty a chance. They had to give her back her life. The surgery was long and arduous, a delicate dance between life and death. Dr. Carter, her brow furrowed in concentration, worked with painstaking precision, carefully removing the bullet from Dusty's spine. The tension in the operating room was palpable, the silence broken only by the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. Carol and Lisa waited outside, their hearts pounding with anxiety, their hopes hanging by a thread. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Dr. Carter emerged, her face etched with exhaustion, but her eyes filled with a quiet relief. The surgery had been successful. The bullet was gone, but the real battle was just beginning. Dusty's recovery was slow and painful. She spent days in a small, padded cage, her body weak, her spirit fragile. She was unable to move her hind legs, the damage to her spine too severe. The pain was constant, a dull ache that throbbed through her body. She whimpered softly, her eyes filled with a deep, inconsolable sadness. But even in her pain, a spark of resilience flickered within her. She clung to her stuffed toy, finding comfort in its familiar presence. She responded to the gentle touch of the nurses, the soothing words of Dr. Carter. She ate the food they offered her, slowly, cautiously, as if afraid it would be taken away. As the days turned into weeks, Dusty began to show signs of improvement. Her appetite increased, her body slowly regaining its strength. The pain, though still present, became more manageable. She started to show interest in her surroundings, her eyes no longer dull and lifeless, but filled with a glimmer of curiosity. Dr. Carter and the team at the clinic began working with Dusty on rehabilitation. They massaged her legs, trying to stimulate the nerves to awaken the dormant muscles. They encouraged her to move, to try to stand, to take a few tentative steps. Dusty struggled, her body resisting, her legs refusing to cooperate. But she didn't give up. She pushed herself, driven by an inner strength, a will to survive. One day, a package arrived at the clinic. It was a custom-made wheelchair, designed specifically for Dusty. Carol and Lisa had organized it, a symbol of their unwavering support, their commitment to her recovery. The staff at the clinic fitted Dusty into the wheelchair, their faces filled with hope. Dusty was hesitant at first, unsure of this strange contraption. But then, she took a tentative step, then another and another. The wheels turned, and Dusty moved. It was a slow, awkward movement at first, but with each passing day, she grew more confident, more agile. She learned to navigate the clinic, exploring its corridors, visiting the other animals. She even ventured outside, her wheels rolling across the grass, her face turned towards the sun. She was no longer confined to her cage, no longer a prisoner of her broken body. She was free. The transformation was remarkable. Dusty, once a fragile, broken creature, was now thriving. She had regained her strength, her spirit, her zest for life. She was an inspiration to everyone at the clinic, a testament to the power of resilience, the unwavering spirit of a survivor. The news of Dusty's remarkable recovery spread quickly, reaching the ears of animal lovers across the state. Carol and Lisa visited her regularly, their hearts overflowing with joy at seeing her progress. They brought her toys, treats, and endless amounts of love. Dusty, once wary and withdrawn, now greeted them with enthusiastic wags of her tail, her eyes sparkling with happiness. One day, a couple named Tom and Mary, who had been following Dusty's story online, came to the clinic. They had recently lost their beloved golden retriever, and their hearts ached for the companionship of a dog. They had seen Dusty's picture, read her story, and they knew instantly that she was the one. They spent hours with Dusty, getting to know her, playing with her, showering her with affection. Dusty responded in kind, her tail wagging furiously, her eyes filled with love. It was a perfect match. Tom and Mary were kind, compassionate people, with a deep love for animals. They promised to give Dusty a forever home, a place where she would be safe, loved, and cherished. The day Dusty left the clinic was bittersweet. Carol and Lisa were overjoyed that she had found such a wonderful home, but they were also sad to see her go. They had become attached to her, had witnessed her incredible journey of recovery, and she had become a symbol of hope for them. Dusty, however, seemed to understand. She knew she was going to a better place, a place where she would be loved unconditionally. She nuzzled Carol and Lisa goodbye, her eyes filled with gratitude, then hopped into Tom and Mary's car, her tail wagging excitedly. Her new life was everything she had ever dreamed of. Tom and Mary showered her with love, taking her for walks in the park, playing fetch with her. She was surprisingly adept at it, even in her wheelchair, and cuddling with her on the couch. She had a warm, comfortable bed, plenty of food and water, and an endless supply of toys. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a beloved member of a family. One evening, as Dusty lay curled up at Tom's feet, her stuffed toy nestled beside her. She looked around at her new home, her heart filled with contentment. She had come so far, from the dusty yard, the neglect, the pain, to this warm, loving home. She had endured so much, but she had never given up hope. And now, finally, she was happy. She had found her forever home, her new dawn. Her story was a testament to the resilience of the spirit, the power of hope, and the transformative love of a second chance. It was a story that would be told for years to come, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always a glimmer of light, a possibility of a new beginning.